Hey everybody, CVH here, and today we're going to be reviewing the cards from the Heroes of Skyrim expansion coming out on June 29th, or that came out on June 29th if you're watching this in the future. I'm actually getting to look at these a bit early, along with everyone else, on the preview event from one of the Bethesda test servers. As you can see, this isn't my actual account. I thought I'd show this since this is going to be the first video of the series. We're going to be starting with Strength and going through all of the cards. So again, a big thank you to Bethesda and Direwolf for letting us content creators get a look at these cards early. And I'm excited to jump right in and get this set review out as soon as possible. Keep in mind, we have only had a very, very limited amount of time to experiment with these cards so far. So, as with most things, my opinions are likely to change, but I wanted to make sure I had an initial set review out there for those of you considering getting the expansion, just wanting to know my opinions on the cards as we first get to see them. Some of these we've already seen spoiled, some of them I've seen for the first time today. So let's get right into it with Strength, like I mentioned. I'm going to be taking a look at the premium versions of each of these cards, not just because the premium art of this set's pretty sweet, but because I don't own all these cards on the test server anyway, and I'm down to 10 soul gems, so if I have to show you guys cards I don't have, might as well be the premium one. Alright, Circle Initiate, 2-drop 2-2 with Prophecy, and Beast Form is +2/+1, so it changes into a werewolf when you break a rune. That doesn't need this card to be the thing that's destroying the rune, it just needs to happen while this card is on the board, and it will get +2/+1. On the surface, 2-drop 2-2 is nothing to write home about, but it does have Prophecy, which helps it out. Pretty poor stats compared to Protector of the Innocent or Greystone Ravager, but I did test this in a bit of aggro decks already so far in the preview event, and it's quite powerful. 2-drop 4-3. That's subjectively kind of insane, so if you can drop this and immediately break a rune on the following turn, this card is going to get big. If you can drop this on the same turn, even better. This seems like a solid, good all-around aggro card. Nothing too crazy, but we'll probably see some play in a very aggressive Prophecy aggro battle mage or deck similar to that. And of course in Arena this card is just simply fine. Virtually every Prophecy is better in Arena because they're harder to play around, and it's just a solid creature stat-wise. You don't feel quite as bad about it being a 2-2 a lot of the time. Less Firebolts, less Executes. So I'll try to give these all a rating in Constructed and a rating in Arena. First glance, out of 10, I'd say this card is, 7 in Constructed, 7 out of 10, probably an 8 out of 10 in Arena, just because, hey, it's a decent Prophecy and it can get slightly bigger, and those stats for a 2-drop in Arena are pretty nuts. So next we move on to Shield Breaker, a 2-cost item with +2/+2, and an enemy creature loses guard. So you're paying 1 Magicka for a Steel Scimitar, and another Magicka for an enemy creature losing guard. This is an interesting one. This could very well surprise me. On the surface, I don't think it's going to see too much play because Steel Scimitar doesn't see a whole lot of play, but for an item deck, this could be where you want to be. The problem is that we already have Earthbone Spinner in Strength, so I'm not exactly sure you need another Silence for guard. It's only going to be, it's not really a silence effect, it's just getting rid of something with guard, so typically only going to be used when you need to get past a guard. That said, I could be surprised by this card simply because it's 2 birds with 1 stone, basically. It's not just an Earthbone Spinner, it's not just a Steel Scimitar, it is a Silence, basically, for a guard, and a +2/+2 all in one. In some item decks, I could maybe see this seeing play, but on the surface, I'm going to give this, I'd say like a 5.5 out of 10 for Constructed. I could be wrong, like I said. For Arena, I would still take the +2/+2, but the enemy creature losing guard, unless you're that straightforward of an aggro deck, could be considered a bit worse. But I'll still give it like a 6.5 out of 10 in Arena. Reasonable buff, any buff is pretty good in Arena, I would say. Next is interesting, Stormcloak Vanguard. 2 Magicka, 1/1 with Charge. Last gasp, put a 5/5 Stormcloak Battalion in your hand, and as we can see, the Battalion is just going to be a 4-cost 5/5, nothing too insane there. This card is interesting because it's really low impact for a 2-drop. The Charge for 1 probably isn't going to be doing a whole lot. You're not going to be pushing a whole lot of damage. You can use this as a very expensive version of Rapid Shot or something where you just send it into something with 1 health. That sounds kind of inefficient, and your benefit is just getting a 4-cost 5/5 to your hand, which is pretty good for tempo, but the 2-cost 1/1 charge is pretty bad for tempo, I would say. So I'm not entirely sure if this card's going to see any play. I don't know if I can give it like a strict rating. My initial thoughts is that it's pretty bad in Constructed, and only marginally better in Arena. I'd probably say like a 4 or a 5 in Constructed, and maybe like a 6 in Arena, but nothing insane. Getting additional 4 cost to your hand in Arena could be better just to make sure you have a decent curve, but in Constructed it's just really not too spectacular, and not doing too much when you first play it. So next we have Berserker of the Pale, 3 cost 4/2. When you summon another creature with 5 power or more, give it +1/+1 and Breakthrough. This is another card that doesn't feel too spectacular. In Arena, this can be pretty solid, because a 3-cost 4/2 doesn't feel quite as bad. Again, less removal, such as Firebolt and the like. And the buff is pretty substantial. Buffs matter a lot in Arena, just to make sure you have the biggest thing on board every turn. This does compete for quite a number of 3-cost cards already, like Morgul Gatekeeper, Withered Hand Cultist, anything in the other colors you're playing, like Endurance has Young Mammoth, for example. So just based around that, I don't think this is going to see too much of an impact in Constructed. It's a totally fine card. I don't hate the card at all, but it seems kind of tricky to find the deck that it works particularly well in. Yeah, I'm just going to give it like a 4 or 5 in Constructed again, just because it doesn't really do a whole lot, but I'll give it like a solid 6 or 7 in Arena. It's reasonable body, and you're likely going to have a solid amount of 5 power or more guys if you're playing an aggressive red deck that you can get the advantage of. Buffs and Breakthrough are pretty decent. Next card I do like a lot. Blades Lookout. 3 cost, 3/3. When you summon a dragon, draw a card. Very simple, very powerful effect. We know how good card draw is. We know that red doesn't really have too much good card draw outside of basically just Triumphant Jarl. We know that we do have some solid dragons from this set that we want to be playing. Blades Lookout, again, a reasonable body, 3/3, not hating it. It's not dying to Execute or Firebolt. It does die to some other things, but what doesn't die to some things? And when you summon a dragon, draw a card. So more often than not, you're going to have to put this down before you play a dragon, but we have seen, as we will see, a number of 4-cost dragons in the set that make this not too hard to get value from very quickly. And yeah, I think for any dragon deck, you're going to want to be playing this card. If you're playing Strength, I will give it a solid 8 out of 10, just for the value it generates and the necessity that your opponent has to kill it very quickly. And in Arena, this may be one that actually gets a bit worse in Arena because it requires having a substantial amount of dragons to reach peak effectiveness, but still, like, not too much worse, right? Like a solid 7 out of 10, just because it's a 3/3 for 3, not bad. You don't hate playing it, and if you get the effect, all the better. Skyforge, legendary support with uses 3, activate, equip a friendly creature with a steel dagger, so that would be the +1/+0 item, and if Skyforge is equipped 3 daggers, it changes into Underforge, which is activate, a friendly creature becomes a werewolf. Friendly werewolves have +1/+1, 3-cost support, so then you will have 3 uses of those, I assume, which is a friendly creature becomes a werewolf, so you're getting +1/+0 3 times, and then +1/+1 3 times. Not thinking this card is too insane. It reminds me of Corsairship. Unfortunately, unlike Corsairship, you're not getting the body at the very beginning of playing it, which is something of a deal breaker to me. And yeah, Corsairship costs 1 more, but it's also a support that doesn't go away. It doesn't have uses. It's not limited. It's an ongoing support. That's exactly what the terminology is. So yeah, I'm not thinking this card is too crazy. A legendary that I think we might be able to skip over a bit. Maybe you use this in conjunction with Corsairship, or in a token-based Crusader or something like that, but I don't think an aggro deck really cares too much about these steel daggers, and it just doesn't seem too high impact for anything else. So yeah, Skyforge, probably not great. Maybe like a 4 or 5 in Constructed, maybe still a 4 or 5 in Arena, because it's still not that good, and you're going to be picking it over other legendaries, which are almost undoubtedly higher impact. Stormcloak Camp. And this is an ongoing support. At the end of your turn, if a creature died this turn, deal 2 damage to your opponent. So yeah, this might be a bit too good if it was at the end of your opponent's turn, because if you're an aggro deck, you'll be pushing their face, and they're going to be spending their turn trying to kill your stuff, so it would be disappointing if they could spend their entire turn attacking your guys, and then they take 2 damage for their work. If you're an aggro player, this is kind of interesting. It fights against prophecies, so if you go in, and they Piercing Javelin or Lightning Bolt one of your guys, then you get to deal 2 extra damage to your opponent, but if you're doing your job as an aggro deck by hitting their face, it's unlikely that you'll be killing their creatures, and you'll have to be relying on them killing your guys on your turn, which is, kind of questionable if that's going to happen. So I'm not really feeling the consistency of this card. That said, it's ongoing. I mean, you have a lot of time to get, the effect. It's not going to go away. So, I mean, if it ever happens during the game, if you can get like 4 damage off of this, I guess that'd be reasonable, but I really don't think it's consistent enough to warrant putting in your deck and then spending 3 magic on for an aggressive deck. Yeah, not really feeling this card. Maybe I'm surprised, but it's a max of 2 damage a turn, and that's probably not going to happen on a lot of turns for most aggro decks. Stronghold Patrol. 3 cost, 3/2. Summon, draw a card if you have 2 other red creatures, strength creatures. This is an orc, by the way. We have seen some cool orcs in this expansion that we'll be getting into, and this is the first one. And we also see a number of cards that have this effect with all the attributes we'll be getting into, the specific ones. They don't all cost the same, they don't all have the same race or stats, but they do all have this. If you have 2 other of the same attribute, you draw a card. And again, card draw is important, and again, Strength doesn't have too much good card draw. And it's important this card is an Orc too, because we've seen how powerful the Orc Warrior decks of late have been, and this simply adds to it, I think. 3-drop, 3-2, not great stats, but the deck just doesn't have card draw. It just doesn't have anything except for Millet and Chieftain, really, that can get the job done, and some of them play Triumphant Jarl. This is much more reasonably costed. It gets buffed by the other effects, such as the Chieftain. You can get it back with the Chieftain. You can do all kinds of things. It counts for your Stone Shard work, basically. Powerful card. Not too slow for Orcs, I don't think. It's a bit slower than the usual creature in that deck. Just doesn't have the most aggressive stats for a 3-drop, obviously. But it's important. It's card draw, and I think this probably slots in very nicely in that deck. So I'm excited to test it. I would give it a solid 8 out of 10 for Orcs, and obviously maybe a little bit less for any other kind of deck. I think most other aggressive red decks will probably still stick to Triumphant Jarl, but a powerful card for Orcs nonetheless. Unrelenting Force, we already talked about this a few times. This was the shout that I actually got to reveal. I'm not on board with it. Really, level 2 unsummon an enemy creature. Doesn't really matter if the power is 3 or less like the level 1 does, but still level 2 is worse than Cast Out. Level 3 unsummons all enemy creatures in a lane, and this is obviously very powerful. There are ways to upgrade shouts and search for them, but I'm still not super sold on this card's power level. Of all the shouts, I think this one might in fact see the least amount of play. I could be putting my foot in my mouth by saying this, but again, just the first level being as bad as it is, for lack of a better word. I'm just going to give this card like a 6 out of 10. In Arena, I mean, are these even going to be available in Arena, so I don't even know if I should rate them. But objectively, it'd get a little bit better, but in Constructed, I just don't like this card too much. Ayla's Huntmate, and I'm probably pronouncing this wrong. 4-cost 3-3 with Beast Form, +1/+1, and draw a card. I tested this card a bit already, and again, card draw is very important. People have said time and time again that red doesn't really have good card draw, and this is another potentially very strong card draw option for an aggressive strength deck. It doesn't have the greatest stats, obviously, but if you can get it to where you drop this card and break a rune in the same exact turn, you're getting a 4-cost 4/4 that draws you a card. That's pretty crazy. I think this card fits very nicely in a lot of aggro decks. If they do need the card draw, it's very reasonably costed. You're not competing with a whole lot for the turn 4 slot, I think, and you should prioritize card draw. Obviously, as a top deck, when you're not being able to destroy a rune immediately, it can be pretty underwhelming, but I think it more than makes up for that. I would give this card a solid 7 or 8 in Constructed, depending on the right deck. I expect this card to see some amount of Constructed play, that is. In Arena, I think this is even more powerful. The card draw, you know, again, at a premium, you're not going to find a lot of it, and most decks in Arena are going to be at least a little bit aggressive, so I assume this card's effect will proc a lot of the time. So yeah, I'd give it a solid 8 in Arena as well. Moving on to Candlehearth Brawler, 4-drop 2/5 Charge Guard. I mean, it's an interesting card, right? It has a very aggressive keyword and a very defensive keyword. That's I just don't think the stats are there. I think there are better things to do on turn 4. This card gets executed. The guard could even be a downside. So, nah, the guard couldn't be really a downside because you're going to be charging with it immediately. But 4-cost 2/5, I'm not feeling it. We've seen 3-cost 2/5s that don't even see a whole lot of play, and I don't really think the charge saves this card. In Arena, it's more reasonable. I'd give it like a 7 or 8 in Arena. Well, 7 in Arena, let's not be crazy. 7 in Arena, 6 or 7 in Arena, and pretty bad in Constructed. Yeah, I don't think I'll touch this card unless I'm just completely wrong about it for some reason. 4-cost Hit and Run. This card is very interesting. An action that states, draw 5 cards and discard your hand at the end of the turn. This one can seem a little bit hard to rate on first glance, because most decks are not going to be able to take advantage of the increased hand size in a single turn before your turn ends. But the initial place your mind should probably go are to the Swindler's Market Archer decks. Now, this card seems tailor-made for those decks. I'm actually kind of concerned with the crazy combos those decks can pull off with Hit and Run, because you're drawing 5 cards, everything in the deck is very cheap, you're getting your close calls, your Nord Firebrands. Ideally, you're playing this card after you already have a market, or maybe even 2 set up, so you can deal a ton of damage off the Hit and Run. You know, if you're in later in stages in the game, you could probably just Hit and Run into an OTK turn, so the effect of discarding your hand at the end of the turn won't actually even happen. I could see this card being very, very scary for that style of deck. I don't think this card is too good outside of that style of deck. It's pretty interesting to see this card, which clearly benefits combo decks in strength, being released. Inspiring Stormcloak, 4-cost 2/2 with Last Gasp, summon a 2/2 Rallying Stormcloak in each lane. I'm not digging this card stat-wise, but I do think it's pretty interesting to mention the fact that this could actually push for some sort of last gasp archer deck. I'm thinking about this card curving into a Necrom Mastermind that you procs the effect, and all of a sudden you have the 2/2 Inspiring Stormcloak and both 2/2 Rallying Stormcloaks in addition to the Necrom Mastermind's 5/4. That's an incredibly powerful turn 4 to turn 5. That said, Stormcloak comes down at a time of the game where Execute and Firebolt are more than live, Silences are more than live, and it just doesn't give you a whole lot of stats on the board immediately. So maybe if something crazy with Necrom comes up for this card, it could be better. As it is, I don't really think it slots into any currently highly played constructed deck. And in Arena, again, it's a little bit better. It's more reasonable, but still not something I'll be rushing to take more likely. Stormcloak Avenger. 4-cost 4/4. At the end of your turn, if 3 or more friendly creatures die this turn, summon a 2/2 Rallying Stormcloak. So 3 or more friendly creatures have to die. That's a pretty steep if. Maybe for some sort of token Doomcrag vampire deck. That's the only deck that I can really think that uses strength that kills its own guys off so frequently. That said, I don't know if that deck wants to be getting this card off just to get the 2/2 Rallying Stormcloak. Again, it's reasonable stat-wise, but for Constructed, I don't really think it fits anywhere. At least you're not going to be proccing the effect too consistently. In Arena, you can probably almost never proc the effect unless you're trading literally everything into something. But the fact that it's a 4-cost 4/4 means it's objectively not the worst in Arena. In a Constructed, it's not just worth it for a 4-cost 4/4. I don't expect this card to see a whole lot of play. Did I look at the premium there? I think I did. Alright, Ulfric's Zealot. 4-cost 5/2. Last Gasp, put a heavy Battle Axe into your hand. Another interesting card. Because it has Last Gasp, synergy with Necrom Mastermind, potentially. Heavy Battle Axe, of course, being the 4-cost +4/+1 item. Just not a powerful enough Last Gasp, I think, to warrant 4-cost 5/2 in red, 5/2. It's not going to trade with anything well. It gets Firebolted, it gets removed by all kinds of things. They're just better 4-costs, I think. I think we've already seen some better 4-costs, and I think there are better 4-costs already in the game for the established decks. Maybe for an item-centric deck, but even in those decks, Heavy Battle Axe is far from the ideal item, so not really feeling this card too much. In Arena, it's more reasonable. Battlefield Scrounger, another sort of item-centric card, 5-cost 3/3 with charge, and Slay, put a random item into your hand. So we're getting Cliff Racer with -1/-1 essentially, which isn't horrible. You know, it doesn't seem great, but it doesn't seem horrible. Not great at pushing face damage, but if you do use this to pick off something tiny or trade with something tiny, you get a random item. A lot of the power level of this card is left up to RNG. That said, I don't think this card is strictly unplayable. You know, it's charge on not the smallest body ever. It does push for 3 if you need it to. It does trade and give you a random item. I don't think this fits in any constructed deck that's already in existence just because the RNG is too heavy to justify the decreased stats you're getting as compared to something like Cliff Racer. But I could be wrong. Maybe this card is deemed worthy of testing, and we find out that the RNG is more manageable. I don't know. This is a really hard one to rate. In Arena, I think I would definitely play that. Charge is really, really good in Arena. You know, it's unexpected, can push that extra face damage or act as removal. And the fact that you're getting card advantage at all, even though it is a random item, is pretty powerful. In Constructed, I'm just unsure about this card, to be perfectly honest. Moving on to Stoutheart Giant. Not much to say about this card. Simple vanilla card, simple beat stick. Not good enough stat-wise at all in Constructed. In Arena, it might see some level of play. 5-cost 6/4, it's barely okay. In Constructed, obviously, you don't want to touch this card with a 10-foot pole. Ulfric Stormcloak, we've talked about when you play a Shout, draw a random Nord from your deck. We've seen a lot of Nords. Tons of Nords that we've talked about. I don't think it's enough to really make a Nord deck happen, but there are certain Nords that are pretty powerful, like Haflinger Marauder. This could slot in as a one-of to some sort of Crusader deck that wants to use Haflinger, maybe even Marok later in the game with some of those Shouts. We saw the red one already, it's not great, but the yellow one actually is great, as we'll be talking about in the Willpower section of this card review. And the stats on this card aren't horrible. I think it's pretty reasonable for some decks. I don't know if we'll actually see those decks become good, but I would expect this to be slotted in certain styles of decks that have Shouts and Nords. Maybe possibly Crusader is what I'm thinking of, but open to other suggestions, obviously. In Arena, you're not likely to get any value whatsoever from this effect, but it is a 5-cost 6/5, so it's better than things like Orb of Vermina, so expect it to be picked every now and then. Moving on to Skyborn Dragon. 6-cost 7/5 with, or 6-cost 7/3, excuse me. I already read this card, I promise. Summon, battle an enemy creature. So 7/3, also let's hover over battle. Each deals damage to its equal to its power to the other. So this card only has 3 health, which means it's probably not going to survive whatever you're battling. That said, just think of this as a 6-cost removal action. which is also a dragon. You have some dragon synergy there. If you have the other 3/3 on the board, you can draw a card. But that said, this card just doesn't seem great. 6 cost to battle something. I mean, 6 cost to basically kill anything with 7 or less health. Is it worth it? I'm not entirely sure that I would ever touch this card outside of a very dedicated dragon deck. I'd rather play cards like Elena, Leaf Lurker, Belligerent Giant. This card will probably never survive after it battles. But, you know, if there's nothing to battle, you can just play this as a 7/3 on 6, which I would like to say isn't the worst, but it's kind of the worst, so yeah, I'm not super sold on this card at all. World Eater's Eerie, we've talked about a bit before. The 6 Magicka ongoing support. When you summon a creature that costs 7 or more, double its power and health. Again, I'm finding a little bit of difficulty finding a deck that this would really fit well in. The mid-range archer decks currently just don't have enough targets. The control warrior decks have enough targets, but it just sort of compounds the problem of it being slow. This effect is undoubtedly very powerful, right? And it's not unique, so you can potentially play 3 of these if you really want to start doubling things to crazy heights. I'm probably wrong about this card to a degree. We're probably going to see some amount of it being played in a very slow, maybe a warrior deck seems to make sense to me or something like that. There are definitely some good targets in red. We just don't currently see decks that use enough of them to really justify this, in my opinion. But the effect is really powerful, especially if you can use it with things that have charge. And there is a card that has charge in this expansion that we haven't already seen in the previews, and that is Swiftwing Dragon that I'll be talking about. But yeah, in combination with cards like that and Tazcad, this could be very powerful. In combination with most other things, I just think it's kind of unnecessary and slow, so I'll be pretty shocked if it sees a substantial amount of play. But it does have some potentially very sick combos. Ayla the Huntress is going to be pretty interesting to talk about, because the initial reception that I saw was kind of that it was unplayable, and I really don't think it's unplayable at all. I think it's actually kind of flexible. 7 cost 3/3, dealing a damage on summon, and the beast form, again, which is whenever whenever you break a rune of your opponent's, is +2/+2, so it turns into a 5/5, and destroy a wounded enemy creature. So something like Leaf Lurker. You can play this card immediately, ping something, use something else to break your opponent's rune, and then kill whatever you pinged. You can play this to ping off a 1 health guy, then break a rune, and then kill something else that's already been wounded. You can even use the summon damage to just ping your opponent down to a rune break if they were 1 point of life away, and just kill something that was already wounded on the board. Pretty flexible card, not hating it. I think this might see a fair amount of play in any sort of... I mean, people have been comparing it only to other cards in Archer. You can play this in Crusader, you can play this in Battle Mage, you can play this in, I don't know, what's the other one? Warrior, if you really wanted to. And I don't think it's bad in those kinds of decks. I think this card might see a fair bit of play, and someone else brought up the good point of it makes you, if you're up against a strength deck, not necessarily Archer with just the Leaf Lurkers and Finish Off, but now any deck with strength, you potentially have to mind which of your creatures are wounded, because Ayla the Huntress could be pretty impactful. I'm going to give this card a solid 7.5 out of 10 in Constructed. I don't exactly know which decks it'll see a lot of play in. It strikes me as sort of an Elena Banach type of card, but I expect this to see some amount of play for sure. And in Arena, yeah, removal's just good, so I would probably pick this in Arena. Ancestor's Battle Axe. 7 cost item, +4/+4, summon, give the top creature of your deck, +4/+4. A little too expensive, a little too rooted in the randomness of what's on top of my deck. Do I even want it buffed in the first place? I'm not about playing a 7 cost item from my hand, but I am about getting this card off of Merrick, so my ratings will be initially like a 3 out of 10 in Constructed, like a 5 out of 10 in Arena, maybe a 6, I don't know, buffing is pretty powerful. Yeah, let's give it a 6 out of 10 in Arena. And like a 10 out of 10 off of Merrick. Off of Merrick, absolutely fine. I paid nothing for the card. So yeah, very powerful effect off of Merrick in those kinds of decks. Will not be happy to see my opponents get those. Duel Atop the World, we've talked about it. It just strikes me as not a great removal action for red. As long as Unstoppable Rage exists, I'm not really sold on playing this card. It's a shame. Look at this premium art. This premium art is so nice, but I really doubt this card sees too much play. Anything this card does, essentially, Rage just does better currently. And even if Rage gets removed from the game, I think there are better removal options in red. That said, in Arena, I think it's pretty viable. It buffs something, and you can, battle your opponent's highest creature, and removal is really at a premium in Arena. So in Arena, I expect to see this card a fair bit. It's one of the more powerful epics you could choose, but in Constructed, not thinking that it has a spot. Wildfire Dragon, summon, deal 1 damage to all other creatures, and slay +1/+1. In a dragon-centric deck, I think this card is fine. I don't think this card's going to kill a whole lot right off the bat. We don't really have any equality type of effect in this game like Hearthstone. That said, it can damage a bunch of things. If this card somehow gets lethal from a Mundus Stone or something, again, that could be cooler, like a Doomcrag clearing literally everything on the board. You're damaging a lot of things with this card. I don't know if that's enough to make it a good card by itself. I don't think I'm going to be playing this in any current deck, but in a dragon-centric deck, it may be one of the better options, especially if aggro decks with a bunch of 1 health guys continue to be played. And then we have the Swiftwing Dragon, which I've already briefly discussed. 8 cost 5/5 with charge, very simple, very elegant, and I like this card a lot actually. I think this one might go as one of the more underrated ones at the very beginning, but 8 cost 5/5 is no joke. It can get reduced by Thieves Guild Recruit. You can double it if you're playing the Eerie, which I don't necessarily recommend, but this seems like one of the potential go-to dragons for a dragon deck using strength. Charge is good. This is a good way to add 5 damage to your push later in the game. It's a common, by the way, so in Arena I do expect this to be widely played as one of the things at the top end of your curve. The premium art's sick. Will I be playing this card in decks that don't really focus on dragons? I honestly might. I might consider it. We'll see how it goes. A little too slow for a dedicated aggro deck, I would say. But just 8 cost 5/5 with charge does not seem bad to me. Maybe I'm missing something, but I expect this to see a good amount of play in any dragon deck that uses red. It's one of the ones I'll be going to first, at least. I think this is just a consistently better card than Wildfire Dragon, probably, which is ironic because it's the lowest rarity in the game, whereas Wildfire Dragon is the highest. And that is it for the strength cards in Heroes of Skyrim. Hopefully you've enjoyed this brief review, and stay tuned for the other colors as well as the neutrals and the dual attribute cards on the channel as well. Hopefully we'll be posting these in quick succession, so they should already be up. Feel free to check them out. Feel free to leave a like. Feel free to subscribe to the channel. Follow my stream in the description, and I'll see you guys next time.